Greatness is not a destiny granted to a few, but a decision available to anyone.
I am particularly excited about this morning's keynote speaker. Having served across a wide range of senior management roles, from CEO to VP of Marketing to Chief Innovation Officer, Byron Reece is an accomplished high-tech trailblazer, an inventor, an entrepreneur, and a lifelong historian. He is the author of Infinite Progress: How the Internet and Technology Will End Ignorance, Disease, Poverty, Hunger, and War. And his next book, due this year, is Fourth Age: Smart Robots, Conscious Computers, and the Future of Humanity. What I love most about listening to Byron is his unapologetic optimism. As Los Angeles Times Magazine put it, Reece believes that planet Earth is ultimately a pretty good place and it's getting better all the time. Ladies and gentlemen, Byron Reece.
If I just started off by saying, hey, things are about to change, that would just seem like a yawner, right? Like, that's old news. But if you say, things are going to change only for the fourth time in 100,000 years, well, now that's something worth paying attention to. And of course, it's being changed by technology. How do you change your company to stay relevant with the times? And then what do you do when your entire industry is undergoing change? These things are not linear. They happen really quickly, and that's the moment that we find ourselves in today. Technology drives progress. While it took us 3,000 years to go from the abacus to the iPad, in 20 years you're going to have something as far ahead of the iPad as it is ahead of the abacus. What are you awesome at? And how do you do it in this new world I'm talking about? And so what I would like to do is start off by talking to that. Let's see where this world that we're in is heading. You live at the great turning point of all of history. And because you were here, and because you were part of making that better world, you can all tell your children and your grandchildren that you were part of making this world that we had all dreamed would someday be possible. In 1964, Bob Dylan released an album called The Times They Are A-Changing. In fact, if you look across the expanse of human history, things have only ever changed 3 times, and they were all 3 brought about by technology. The first time things changed was 100,000 years ago, and that's when we got language. Language is our key feature as a species because it allows us to coordinate our actions. And the interesting thing about language is it came at exactly the same time as another technology came, which was fire. And the reason these 2 things are linked together is because fire gave us the ability to cook our food. And when you can cook your food, you actually get a lot more calories out of it. And what we did is we took all of these extra calories and we went all in on the brain. And that's how come your brain uses 20% of all of your energy. But with animals, even the so-called higher animals, it's never more than 8 or 9%. The second time things changed was just 10,000 years ago. That's when we got agriculture. Agriculture gave us cities, right? Because for the first time, we would settle down and we would stay in one place. And when you had cities, you had the division of labor. Everybody learned to specialize. The third time things changed was just 5,000 years ago, almost yesterday. And that's when we got writing. So anything that happened before that is literally prehistoric. And what was the technology that we got when we got writing? We got the wheel. And if you think about it, those also go together in that the base of the nation state was finally created. So I believe what I'm here to do is to tell you that things are about to change again for the 4th time. And what we are learning to do is build machines that think. We're outsourcing what our brains do to a machine. In addition, we're outsourcing what our bodies do to robots. And presumably the thought that's coming into your mind right about now is, well, wait a minute, if we outsource our brains and our bodies, what are we? What is left of us? What makes us human? And I want to point out that it took us 5,000 years to go from the wheel to the moon. And yet, that didn't happen in a linear fashion. We weren't halfway to the moon 2,500 years ago. Far from it. And I'm only going to show one graph in this entire talk, and it is this. It is this. This is per capita income worldwide for the last 2,000 years. As you can see, it went along flat forever, and then something happened 250 years ago that caused it to go up like that. And that's the Industrial Revolution. That's the scientific method. That's how we systematize the acquisition of knowledge, and there is no reason in the world that line is not going to continue to go up like that. So I believe deeply in something called progress. Technology drives progress. Now, what is it? We use the phrase a lot, but if you think about it, all technology really is something that multiplies human ability. This is Gordon Moore. He founded Intel, and 52 years ago, he made an observation. He said, the power of computers seems to be doubling every 2 years. It's been going on for about a decade, and I think it's going to keep going a little while longer. But Moore's law is like a little tip of an iceberg of a very big truth, which is technology has this way of doubling and doubling and doubling and doubling and doubling over time. Now, the problem is we're not any good at picturing what happens when things double a bunch of times. I mean, nothing in your real life actually does that. You don't wake up one morning with 2 kids, and then 4, then 8, then 16, then 32, then 64. Your bank balance doesn't go from 100 to 200 to 400 to 800, and so forth. So people are fantastically bad at estimating how big things get when they double. There's a story which illustrates this. It's about the guy that invented the game of chess. It's 1,000 years ago in present-day India. A mathematician came to the ruler and he said, I have invented chess. And the ruler said, this is fantastic. What would you like for a reward? And he says, I am a humble man. Put a grain of rice on that first square. Then 2 on the second, 4, 8, 16. I just want the rice on the 64th square, that's it. So is it this much rice? Or is it this much rice? Well, it turns out that it's more rice than has ever been grown in the history of humanity, ever. When the ruler found this out, he had the guy put to death. There's another lesson in there, by the way. But the big point is that normally your mind doesn't just instantly go there, right? And so what happens is we fantastically underestimate how big of a deal this doubling is. It means that while it took us 3,000 years to go from the abacus to the iPad, in 20 years you're going to have something as far ahead of the iPad as it is ahead of the abacus. And so what does this mean? What does all of this mean? It means something very simple. It means that all technical problems, we will solve them. So the first thing you will live to see in this 2040 horizon I'm talking about is you will live to see the end of disease. If you look at the worst disease there ever was, it was smallpox. It killed more people than have died in all the wars in all of history put together. And yet, the worst disease ever, this man, Jenner, made a vaccine for it in the 1790s, which is very interesting because Louis Pasteur, who came up with germ theory, hadn't even been born yet. So in other words, we were able to make a vaccine for the worst disease there ever was before we even knew it was caused by germs. Disease cannot adapt anything like doubling every 2 years that we can do. If you can hold out for 25 more years, you face the very real possibility that you will never die, because there's no reason to believe that death itself isn't just a technical problem. I think you're going to live to see the end of hunger. Well, the United States actually throws away enough food to feed all the hungry people in the world. You'll live to see the end of poverty. Poverty is just a technical problem. You don't have to have poor countries. In the last 120 years, 85% of all economic growth has come from technological advance. So what's going to happen when that line I showed you at the very beginning goes up 1,000-fold, goes through the sky? The promise of what I wanted to talk to you today is how do you, uniquely you, navigate this world? And I want to talk about 3 things. How do you innovate products? How do you come up with products in a world that has these kind of life cycles? And then I want to talk about how do you change your company to stay relevant with the times? And then finally, what do you do when your entire industry is undergoing change? I'm going to give you 3 guidelines. They're all going to sound like something out of the Da Vinci Code. So the first one is learn to listen with your eyes. The second one is solve the problem no one expects you to solve. And the third one is study the data that others ignore. You see technology disrupt more industries. What we find is that entrenched players aren't generally going in and competing the way they used to. So ATM machines, they make a machine and everybody said, oh, that's the end of tellers, right? Well, what happened is when the technology came in and lowered the cost of a teller, banks responded by opening more branches because they could provide better customer service. And there are more tellers employed today, by far, than there were before the ATM came out. The examples are endless of technology coming in and lowering the cost of one thing, and then entrenched players using that lower cost to compete in an entirely different way. Now, I'm not trying to sugarcoat any of what's going to happen in the future. We're going to have disruption occur. It's happened before and it's going to happen again. And it's probably, frankly, going to happen to all of us in one form or the other. And if it's any comfort, we've been here before, right? Like the Industrial Revolution. I mean, if you had said, hey, 90% of the country farms, and people said that at the time, like, you can't pull these people off the farm who that's all they've ever done, and put them in a factory where everything's different and they have to learn all this new stuff. And of course, it happened. We had the Industrial Revolution, and I think the most underutilized resource in the whole galaxy is human potential. And people who think there's only a finite number of jobs actually misses the point entirely. And because technology magnifies what you're able to do, technology means all these new jobs progressively pay more. And that's why you always have disruptive technology in the United States history and full employment and rising income. Now, there is an argument that people make when they hear this? And it goes like this. They say, well, that's all well and good. But what happens, unfortunately, in the grand scheme of life, is that technology generates new jobs up here. Generates these really awesome jobs, like geneticist. And technology destroys jobs down here, like cab driver. And then the setup is always this. Do you really think that cab driver is going to get a job as a geneticist? So the question is not, can the cab driver be a geneticist? The question is, can everybody do a job just a little harder than the one they have today? And that's all it takes for technology to give everybody a promotion. Everybody on this thing gets a promotion because of this. And that's what you want to have happen. If you look at all the jobs in 1950 to 2000, probably over a third of them vanished. If you look at the difference between 1900 and 1950, over a third of them vanished. There are three views about this. One is that we're not going to have any unemployment. That's what I hold to, that technology is what people use to improve their productivity, and that's what's been going on for 200 years, and there's nothing particularly different about this. Now, it's the vanity of every age to think they live at the great turning point of all creation. Having said that, we live at the great turning point of all of creation. Everything in this world that we have ever wanted to build is a kinder and juster world within our grasp. So I would just close off by saying this. Why do we still read Shakespeare 400 years later? We read Shakespeare because we still know all of those people, because humans don't change. And so if you come back in 100 years or so, still alive, all of you, I'm going to point out that we're all still reading Shakespeare. Thank you very much. Greatness is not a destiny granted to a few, but a decision available to anyone. And the main difference between people who change the world and people who don't is whether or not they've made that decision. I have decided that I am going to change the world, and I invite you to do the same. Thank you.